Hello, and welcome back to another edition of Turf Talk. I'm James Scully, joined by Vance Hanson. And Vance, the road to the Kentucky Derby and Kentucky Oaks Series kicked off last weekend at Churchill Downs with the first points race, first qualifiers, and the Iroquois went to the Tabulator, a dialed-in colt and improved to 3 for 3 for Larry Ravelli. He had won his first two races convincingly, but they had been an Arlington and a maiden and Prairie Meadows in a 6 furlong stake there. So he was a little bit, I thought, nobody really knew if he was good enough to win on that stage, but he proved best, defeating the big favorite Hollywood Star, who ran second. Any thoughts on the Iroquois?
The Tabulator definitely had a great trip throughout the Iroquois, sat in second the whole way, pounced, took the lead in the stretch, and had plenty left. It seemed like even though he bore out a little bit nearing the finish line, he seemed to have plenty left to hold off Hollywood Story. So good performance on his part. The field in that race, just like the Pocahontas later, very spread out. Don't know how deep those particular fields were when all was said and done.
Right, yeah, and that's a good point about it being spread out, because I always sort of think that flatters, horses, these young horses, when they're sort of spread out. And yeah, I mean, the Tabulator, I know Jose Valdivia, who has been crushing the standings at Arlington, he's the regular rider. He said he was a little bit green in the stretch and drifting out, but perhaps he was getting a little bit tired, but still a solid pedigree for longer distances. Dialed in, has definitely got some route runners, Gunavera and others, and he's out of a Giants Causeway mare, Bellamy Roads in the immediate pedigree, so might be okay going a route of ground.
Yeah, and with his tactical speed that he has, he's always going to be able to find himself in decent position no matter where he runs, and that's a good asset to have, especially going further as he will continue to do so. Yeah,
and Hollywood Star, just one quick mention, Romans, just loaded with two-year-old prospects, has Dak Attack, who's gearing up for this, probably the Breeders Futurity, and then Free Drop Billy, who ran second to Saratoga Special. So we'll see both them this fall as well. In the Pocahontas, it featured an upset. Texas-bred Patrona Margarita was coming off a third in a
Texas-bred stake.
Texas-bred, Lone Star. Didn't run any good on a sloppy track in the debutante and broke her maiden at Churchill, but didn't run that fast. Her speed rating was in the 80s, but still a nice win by the filly.
Yeah, and it was very convincing, which brings us back to that previous point that I made, questioning the quality of the field perhaps. Looking back on the race, she was a little bit tough to come up with on paper because of that Texas-bred stakes loss, but she did appear, in retrospect, a filly that needed some extra distance. She had been running, five and a half furlongs beforehand. So clearly relished a mile and a 16th, handled it quite easily, and maybe some better things ahead for her as well.
Yeah, and both races are winning. You're in the Tabulator 100%. We can count on seeing him at Del Mar. Patrona Margarita, she's not Breeders Cup eligible, and her sire special rate isn't as well, but she could still be supplemented. The one other win in your event over the weekend, the Woodbine Mile, on Saturday, the Woodbine Mile featured World Approval, who has now won 4 or 5 starts this year. His first stakes win was listed at Tampa, then he won the Dixie. His only loss in the Manhattan when he was a close 5th, it was a 1.25 miles. I think he's become more of a mile and 1/8 or less type of horse, and had won the 4-star day before the Woodbine Mile. So he really rolling for Cassie.
Yeah, he's really come into his own, and it's great that they're pretty much, with the exception of the Manhattan, have concentrated on mile and a 16th races, and they've absolutely cleaned up throughout the East Coast and now in Canada. Big win for him on Saturday against a very good group of European horses, and in my opinion, it just seems like a little bit of a down year for European milers this year. Ribchester's kind of on top over there, but he's going to be running in the Queen Elizabeth II Stakes coming up at Ascot. But other than that, it's just kind of been a free-for-all. The 3-year-olds haven't quite trained on like a Churchill. Barney Roy's kind of dropped a couple of races at 1.25 miles. He might cut back a little bit going forward, but I think this is a prime opportunity for World Approval to make a huge splash in the Breeders' Cup Mile at Del Mar and possibly take a champion turf male honors as well. So it's a very exciting prospect Mark Cassie has, and the broodmare, Win Approval, Florida bred. She's just been an outstanding producer throughout her life, and it's just great to see another big runner from her, multiple Grade 1 winner now.
Yeah, it's good analysis about the foreign horses. We'll continue to dive into that in the weeks to come. But well, thank you for joining us on this edition of Turf Talk. We'll be back later in the week with an On Point. Thanks for joining us.